Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5. Today is May 4th, 2017, and a lot is going on in the news as always. I'm interested today in talking about Europe. We have an election coming up between Marine Le Pen and Monsieur Macron. Marine Le Pen is described by the state-run media as far-right, and Macron is described as center-right. The communists, the socialists, the leftists, the labor people in France have all been knocked out of the picture, and only these two are left. And last night, or yesterday, they had their one and only debate, and it's 2.5 hours long. And I won't inflict the debate on you, but I will talk about it, because the amazing thing about the debate is that this is, first of all, this is the first time that her party, Marine Le Pen's party, the National Freedom Party, or is it it's called the FN, has been allowed to actually get on the debate stage. So in a way, she has already won, even though she may lose. I have a strong feeling, however, that she will win, and that this will continue the worldwide zeitgeist, the strong wind blowing toward the resurgence of the nation state, getting away from the superstate, the idea of the superstate, which subsumes all the nation states into one gigantic state, which is a totalitarian or authoritarian state in which the people's wishes are not represented and sacrifices must be made by the people. Of course, there's a lot of other things going on before that. We have the confrontation with Korea, but I believe that this kind of posturing, the launching of the missiles with North Korea will, I certainly hope it doesn't end up in an exchange, a nuclear exchange between China, Korea, United States, and other countries, and becomes a worldwide conflagration. And we feared this type of thing just a week or so ago, but now nothing has happened. So I think those fears are subsiding, and we are going to hopefully get a return to the status quo, more or less. I don't think that the leadership will be knocked out of power in North Korea anytime soon. Why? Because they're simply too strong, and they have that leverage of being able to bomb Seoul, South Korea, the capital of South Korea, which is only 20 or 30 miles away from the North Korean border. So this is the ace in the hole that North Korea always has. If you attack us, we'll bomb Seoul and kill thousands of people. The latest estimate of an all-out war, a nuclear, let's say a first strike against North Korea, they're estimating 1 million dead in North Korea. And of course, 99.999% of those people would be just innocent civilians. So we have to be very careful before we actually do a first strike, whether it's nuclear or not, on that level. And who knows what repercussions for the United States and its allies would result from that. And now a lot of the liberals, the left, the Democrats are very concerned that Trump is trigger happy, that he's going to start a nuclear war, and they're scared to death about that. And I don't think that Trump wants to start a nuclear war any more than anyone else. And whether or not Trump is stupid, insane, a megalomaniac, a malignant narcissist, which is what I've heard, some psychiatrist called him that. A whole group of psychiatrists never talked to Trump, never sat him down, never examined him, and yet they pronounce he's a malignant narcissist, whatever that is. And one thing we do know, we can say for certain, is that Trump thinks quite highly of himself, but what politician doesn't think quite highly of himself or herself? And they are just simply, that's the stratus that they inhabit. That's the ocean that they swim in. So that would be not unexpected for somebody like Trump. Whether or not he's incompetent, well, time will tell. But we're learning a little bit about Trump's style. Trump said he would negotiate, that he would make deals. He promised to make deals. And this is apparently what he is doing. Now, he's being criticized whenever he talks to a dictator, a bloody-handed dictator. Well, since when did U.S. presidents abstain from talking to bloody-handed dictators? When Obama went over to Saudi Arabia and the other Middle Eastern countries, you talk about bloody-handed dictators. Saudi Arabia doesn't have a dictator. It has a king. And a family, the House of Saud, has run Saudi Arabia very, very harshly. They deal harshly with any opponents. They're under the most extreme form of Sharia law in Saudi Arabia, which, they have regular beheadings. They do all the horrific mutilations that happen under Sharia law. And yet Obama goes and literally bows in front of the king of Saudi Arabia. You can look it up. And yet people on the left, they're not worried about that. They're not concerned. I think people on the right were bothered by it, because here is a president of a republic bowing to a king. Is the Saudi king really worth bowing to? And that, of course, fueled speculation that Obama's a Muslim and so on. So we'll find out with Trump. He's only just recently passed the 100-day mark. We'll see how it goes. One thing we do know for certain is that the so-called Trump effect is definitely happening. And we're going to be seeing possibly something very amazing happen on Sunday. I believe Sunday coming up. In a few days, the French election will happen between Le Pen and Macron. And although Macron is favored to win by the media, by the polls, you have to remember that in Great Britain, Brexit, in United States with Trump, then later in Germany with Merkel, and now possibly in France, the mainstream state-run media was literally wrong. They were predicting overwhelmingly that Brexit would lose, that Trump would lose, and that Merkel, they predicted that Merkel would win, but she lost. She's still the Chancellor of Germany, but her days are numbered. And I did want to show you a clip from Nigel Farage, one of my favorite politicians, that's about 24 minutes long. And I urge you to watch and listen to what he has to say. This is a very interesting clip. It's a compilation. It's a few months old now. But it's very telling, because Nigel Farage predicts that Trump will win. And you get the mainstream media now often saying that no one predicted that Trump would win. And I've heard that over and over and over. I myself believed that Trump would win, and a lot of other people thought. Alex Jones thought Trump would win, and Nigel Farage thought that Trump would win. A lot of people did. They saw the way that it was going, and they predicted it correctly, and they beat the professional pollsters. And this may very well what's going to be happening on Sunday with the French election. And I predict that Le Pen will win, even though the polls say that she won't win. And in a way, I'll reiterate, even if Le Pen doesn't win the presidency of France, in a way she has already won, because no member of her party, and I do not call these people far right, they are nationalists. They believe that France should be a nation state, a strong nation state, a republic. And they fought very hard to be a republic. It took them a long time, but they finally got rid of their monarchy in France completely, and they want to stay a republic. And the European Union is definitely not a republic. It is in no way democratic. And is this what we want for the future of the world? Because the European Union is the model for the future of the world. If it falls apart, and it certainly looks like it is, then it's going to be a whole different ball game for those globalists. Nigel Farage really nails it. So let's watch now Nigel Farage nail it again, as he always does, so entertainingly and so full of information. And I'll talk later about him, what he had to say.
German Chancellor will not budge on is the principle of free movement within the European Union. She's made that clear, and indeed Mr Cameron changed the draft of his speech a couple of months ago on this very issue. What I expect to see are some cosmetic concessions, perhaps the Germans agreeing that maybe child benefit should not be paid to children living in other parts of Europe. But even if Mr Cameron later on today stands on the steps of Downing Street and says this is a great victory, it still won't work, because the polls have made it clear they will veto it anyway. I do not believe that the British people can be bought off with anything less than the red line of us being able to control who does and does not come into our country. And unless the British Prime Minister can get a concession on the free movement of people, I do not believe in a referendum the British people would vote for us to remain members. I think that even the Germans and the European Central Bank are now beginning to realise that it's politically impossible for Greece to remain members of the euro. So they are preparing themselves for the first member to break away and comforting themselves that if it's Greece, that's fine, it'll just be Greece and nobody else. You only have to look at what is happening in Spain and in Italy, with very large protest movements, with now half of the voters in Italy voting for parties that want to leave the euro or want a fundamental renegotiation of their terms, to understand that the euro is doomed. And thank goodness we didn't listen to many in Westminster, and we didn't join.
Well, joining me now is the UKIP leader, Nigel Farage. I mean, let me put it to you, this is all just a bit of pre-referendum negotiation. Mrs Merkel just setting out her position.
There is no negotiation. You know, I've spent over 15 years in the European Parliament, working in Brussels, and I can tell you there is a unanimity of view that these treaties are not to be unpicked in any way at all, and that the free movement of people is considered to be one of the most important elements of the European Union. The only country in Europe in which our politicians pretend there can be an a la carte menu is here in Britain, in Westminster. It's not possible. And so Mr Cameron was pushed, I think, by UKIP's success in Clacton into extending his renegotiating position into saying we should renegotiate free movement. It isn't going to happen.
But let me put it to you, this is all bluff. At the end of the day, Germany would be deeply reluctant to see Britain leave the EU because it wants a country of similar political outlook inside the European Union. So they don't want us to leave.
My experience of Brussels politics is that the Germans don't bluff. They're very straightforward. They really do say what they think. And Mrs Merkel would rather Britain left the European Union than those treaties started to be unpicked. Once that process begins, the European project is finished, and she knows that.
We hear now, though, that Mr Cameron may try a different sort of approach, trying to stretch the existing rules as far as they possibly could go, saying perhaps that EU migrants coming here would have to have a job. Now, he could get a deal on that.
Mr. Cameron will try and fiddle around at the edges. What he will not be able to do is to change the basic principle that nearly 500 million people, if they want, can come to this country. That isn't going to change. He'll fiddle around the edges and actually finish up satisfying neither side.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Terry Cabras. Now for 3 minutes we have Mr. Farage.
We're embarked upon a course of almost unbelievable stupidity. The historic error made by Chancellor Merkel last year by saying all can come has led directly to this mess. And now we're being blackmailed by Turkey. First they came for 3 billion in a promise to reduce the numbers coming in to Greece and the rest of Europe. And of course, when the numbers increased many-fold, they came back for another 3 billion. And they will keep on coming back for more and more and more. As the British poet Rudyard Kipling observed of the Danish incursions into England. And that is called paying the Danegeld. But we proved it again and again that if once you have paid him the Danegeld, you'll never get rid of the Dane. And now they've got us over a barrel. This new deal, where for every one illegal migrant we send back, if our human rights laws allow it, they'll send us another one back from Syria. So the argument is, we paid them a fortune not to reduce numbers, and yet we've given in and we've said visa-free access for 75 million Turks from June of this year. In theory, they can stay for 90 days. In practice, many will disappear or, of course, claim family reunion. The numbers will go sharply, sharply up. And in return for all of this, we're now going to fast-track Turkey as a full member of the European Union. My goodness me, I wish that David Cameron was as good at negotiations as the Turks are. So we're going to go into political union with a country that's got borders with Iraq, Iran and Syria. We're going to go into political union with a country that is poorer than anybody else in the European Union and give free movement for 75 people, and join up with a government that is increasingly Islamist and authoritarian. The Turkish Prime Minister said this week, Turkish membership will be a turning point. Too right. The British Prime Minister has long supported Turkey being a member of this union. In fact, he's fought hard over 10 years for them to join. He doesn't bat an eyelid at the extra £500 million we will stump up to help fund this crisis. Well, this referendum in Britain is all about what is the safest option. And given that the boss of Europol says already there are 3,000 to 5,000 Islamist terrorists that have come into Europe using the migrant routes, it's pretty clear to me that a vote to remain is a vote for Turkey. A vote to remain is a vote for massively increased immigration into Britain, and a vote to remain is a vote that makes Britain more vulnerable to terrorism. Safer to vote to leave and take back control of our borders. Thank you.
Now, the German leader lost a crucial vote over the weekend. Her party is due to have the same fate next weekend. Similar populist rages are building in Portugal and Italy and France. And some are calling it a Donald Trumpian rage, that the world is going the way of let's protect our borders. Something that has been a cornerstone of former UK Independence Party leader Nigel Farage, who joins us right now. Nigel, good to have you.
Good to be here and welcome back.
And thank you for your very kind note, Nigel. I appreciate that. Let me ask you about what's going on here, because there's something in the global well, not just in the United States, but you've astutely picked up on this trend years ago, whether people agree or disagree with you. But I think the Merkel pounding jeopardizes her very leadership, and for that matter, the German leadership of Europe. What's going on?
Well, let's get a sense of context here. I mean, there's been opposition growing over the course of the last few years to the whole direction that global politics, global corporate politics, has been going in. And what Brexit has done is to give inspiration to absolutely everybody who believes in nation-state democracy, controlling their borders and putting the interests of their own people first. And I see
a big parallel with what's happening in Germany with Brexit, but equally, I was over a couple of weeks ago in Jacksonville, Mississippi. I was at that Trump rally, and I met those people afterwards, and those people in Mississippi felt exactly the same as the people who voted for Brexit and the people who came out and gave Angela Merkel such a bloody nose at the weekend. What we're asking for is portrayed by the international media elites and business elites and political elites as if we're bad people advocating something extreme and dangerous. We're not. We're asking for normality, and normal countries control their borders and look after their citizens.
That does seem to be the trend, but it does invite the wrath of the United Nations, the human rights chief recently slamming you and Donald Trump for using what they've been calling ISIS-style propaganda. What do you make of that?
Well, do you know what, Neil? I've been called many things over the years. A lot of them I wouldn't want my mum to hear. But no one's ever compared me to ISIS. And it shows the level of desperation these over-bloated, paid international bodies are sinking to. They see Brexit as the first brick in the wall. They will now do anything to stop Donald Trump. And remember, they try to stop Brexit by using Project Fear. They're now going to use the same tactics against Trump in this campaign.
Real quickly, the polls in Germany over the weekend did not look like Merkel's party would lose by the magnitude it did, much as the Brexit polls were very different than the final results. I suspect people, when they're polled on a subject, do what they think is politically correct or say what they think is politically correct and vote otherwise. And I'm wondering if that is a trend we see happening again and again in Europe, and I suspect maybe in the United States.
Well, you're right. Firstly, people sometimes are reluctant to tell pollsters how they will really vote. But here's the other point. The polling industry is now virtually bankrupt because what they can't measure are non-voters who get back engaged with the process. 2.5 million people turned out on the 23rd of June, helped us have our Independence Day and win that Brexit referendum. No one thought it would happen. The bookmakers, the experts, the commentariat, the pollsters. And I just have this feeling in my water that what has happened in the last fortnight in the USA is that the Trump campaign now has the big M. It's got momentum behind it. And I met those people in Jacksonville after the rally. Many of them had never voted in their lives. And I would say to the commentators in America and globally, and our friends who've abused me today at the United Nations, you're in, I think now, for a very big shock.
It's already evidencing itself in one part of the world and 4 other countries that are looking at the same type of regional elections that could change the face of Europe. Nigel, thank you very, very much.
But one event has woken people up to the folly of EU leaders, the Juncker Common Asylum Plan, the Merkel call, which led to a stampede. Those of us that have warned that unlimited numbers of people from different cultures without security checks would pose a threat to the cohesion of our societies were roundly abused for doing so. And then we came to New Year's Eve. Munich. The train station, the main station, closed down because of a terrorist threat, the intelligence coming from Syria and Iraq. The very same train station that in September people had stood at holding up their placards, refugees welcome. That irony was not lost on me. But it's what happened, I think, in Cologne, where we saw the mob. Up to 1,000 young males in the street sexually assaulting and harassing women. It is, I think, in many ways one of the most disgraceful public order events that we've seen in modern day Europe. And yet there was an attempt by the police and the press to cover it all up, and even the suggestion from some German politicians that German young women should change their dress and their mode of behaviour in the street, which I thought was a total insult. There's even a name for these assaults. A name for these assaults in Egypt because they've now become commonplace and part of everyday life. And we ought to have the courage to send out a message to say these assaults must never be acceptable in any European town or city, and we'll do our damnedest to make sure that it never happens again. Now we go to the next European summit, and Mr. Cameron's going to conclude his renegotiation. I've no doubt there'll be a compromise on the fairly minor issue of migrant benefits. I've no doubt that he will come back from that summit with a few promissory notes for the future, about Britain's relationship. But what he's not going to be talking about is our ability to get back control of our borders. And the British people know that those young men in Cologne, in a few years' time, will have EU passports and be free to come to Britain. And just to give you an idea of how big the sea change has been, a Daily Telegraph commentator, Alison Pearson, who had said she was undecided on Brexit, she didn't have enough information, wrote this the other day. She said, after Cologne, the EU referendum is about nothing less than the safety and security of British women. We, the Euro clueless, need to woman up and vote for the right of our daughters and granddaughters to live as they choose and to smile in the street. No more Mrs. Don't Know, let's get the hell out. I hope 2016 is our year of deliverance.
Farage?
Mr. Farage has the floor.
Thank you. Look, nobody in their right minds would not agree that it was a sensible thing to do to get France and Germany together round the table, to break bread with each other, to have a deal with each other back in the 1950s, and to work as sovereign democratic nations together for peace. All of that was absolutely right and high-minded. Sadly, the whole thing has become corrupted. Tony Blair said, the EU today is no longer about peace, it is about power. And how right he was, and how that power has shifted. When Kohl and Mitterrand came here, representing their countries 25 years ago, it was a partnership of equals, but no longer. France is now severely diminished, trapped inside a currency, frankly, from which she can't recover. And the French voice in this relationship and in Europe is little more now, frankly, than a pipsqueak. We're living, and it's an irony, isn't it, that a project that was designed to contain German power has now given us a totally German-dominated Europe. Just look at the euro. Germany has a currency that is undervalued by 20%. A growing and massive trade surplus, and most growth in the German economy since the collapse of 2008 has indeed been in exports to other Eurozone countries, such as your very big arms sales to countries like Greece. And when we have a general election that says a country like Greece wants to change direction, well, I'm sorry, but that now must be brushed aside because the Germans don't want it. And what must count as perhaps the worst piece of public policy seen in modern Europe for half a century, when you compounded the already failing and flawed EU common asylum policy by saying to the whole world, please come to Europe. And we saw, frankly, virtually a stampede. And we learn that 80% of those that are coming are not Syrian refugees. In fact, what you've done is to open the door to young, male, economic migrants, many of whom, I have to say, behave in a rather aggressive manner, quite the opposite to what you would ever expect to see from any refugee. And yet when that failure is met by objections from countries like Hungary, their opinions are crushed. This isn't a Europe of peace, it's a Europe of division. It's a Europe of disharmony. It's a Europe that is a recipe for resentment. And yet, faced with all this failure, both of you said the same thing today. You said Europe isn't working, so we must have more Europe. More of the same failing. Well, there is, I think, a bright star on the horizon. It's called the British referendum. And given that none of you want to concede Britain the ability to take back control of our own borders, a Brexit now looks more likely than at any point in modern time. And I hope and pray that Britain voting to leave the European Union will be the beginning of the end of a project, however noble its original intentions, has gone rotten. Is more of the same. More of the same. And indeed, I met the German Chancellor Angela Merkel about 18 months ago to talk about this. Now, it's a very odd thing, but I find myself as one of the 7 leaders of a group in the European Parliament. And this means they have to invite me to all the official functions, which is something that I enjoy very much more than they do. So I was at this lunch, And the German Chancellor was there, sitting across the table, and I can let you into a little secret about Angela Merkel, that in private, she's even more miserable than she looks in public. And I said, Chancellor, wouldn't it be a liberation for the German taxpayer, who's just spent 20 years paying for the reintegration of Eastern Germany back into Western Germany? Wouldn't it be a liberation for them not to have to sign blank checks in perpetuity to the Club Med countries? And really, wouldn't your own voters be happier with that situation? And wouldn't it for the Greeks be a chance of salvation to leave the euro, to have a massive competitive devaluation, to write off much of their debt, to regain their democracy, and to try and trade their way back to profitability, much in the same way that Iceland has done since 2008? Oh no, Mr. Farage, she said. Greece must not be allowed to leave the euro, because if Greece leaves the euro, other countries will leave too, and that will be the end of our European dream. Well, there is a bit of me that says I'll drink to that, I suppose. But what she's really saying, and what Mr. Barroso is saying, and what Mr. Herman Van Rompuy, I can never quite keep a straight face when I mention his name, but what they're saying is, whatever the social cost, whatever the economic cost, we must continue with the project. And in maintaining this project, what they have done is they have literally stripped out all forms of democracy from those countries. Greece is now run by a troika. Representatives from the European Commission, the European Central Bank and the IMF, once a fortnight, fly into Athens airport, go and see the Greek Prime Minister and tell him what tax rates must be, what spending can be. All democracy is gone. In fact, it even got so bad that a couple of years ago, when the Greek Prime Minister suggested a referendum on staying in the euro, within 48 hours, the bully boys of Brussels had removed him and replaced him with a puppet. And the same thing happened in Italy too. You know, this is really very, very worrying. The economics isn't working, and therefore the logic is, let's destroy nation-state democracy and let's place all the power that we can at the centre. Well, I think that is damn dangerous, because surely the whole point about democracy is, however much we may dislike the government that's in power, what we do is we battle for another party with a different manifesto to take over and institute new policies. It's called parliamentary democracy.
I have expressed a very strong opinion about Angela Merkel on this program here in America. My opinion is this: I think she ruined Europe. I think she changed Europe forever without asking anybody else in the European Union. Am I coming on too strong, Nigel?
No, you're not. Here's the irony. The European project, when it was founded back in the 1950s, was designed to contain Germany. You know, we've had two disastrous world wars caused by the Germans, and the idea is that the club would contain Germany so that Germany could not become the powerful, dominant force. And it is now a German-dominated Europe, and whether it's the Eurozone and the miseries in the Mediterranean with youth unemployment rates running in some countries at over 50%, or what she did last July, when she said, as many migrants that want to cross the Mediterranean and come to Europe, you're all welcome. And she was doing that not just on behalf of Germany, but actually on behalf of the whole of the EU. I think it was the biggest policy failure we've seen in the Western world for many, many decades.
Look, Europe's going to have to handle, but they're going to have riots in Germany. What's happening in Germany, I always thought Merkel was like this great leader. What she's done in Germany is insane. It's insane. They're having all sorts of attacks. They're having
letting in
that many people. What they should do is the countries should all get together, including the Gulf states who have nothing but money. They should all get together and they should take a big swath of land in Syria and they should do a safe zone for people so that they could have a safe where they could live. And then ultimately go back to their country, go back to where they came from.
Does the U.S. get involved in making that safe?
I would help them economically, even though we own $19 trillion. What I won't do is take in 200,000 Syrians who could be ISIS. John, I've been watching this migration, and I see the people. I mean, they're men. They're mostly men, and they're strong men. These are physically young, strong men. They look like prime-time soldiers. Now, it's probably not true, but where are the women? You see some women, you see some children, but for the most part, I'm looking at these strong men. So he has two things. Number one, why aren't they fighting for their country? And number two, I don't want these people coming over here. And even on a humanitarian, you know, when I was first asked this question, you asked it to me a long time ago, when they were talking about 3,000 people, I begrudgingly would say, oh, maybe, I don't know, maybe.
Letting them into the United
States. A
States.
little bit. Then they said 10,000. I'm not thrilled, but maybe 200,000 people. This could be the greatest Trojan horse. This could make the Trojan horse look like peanuts if these people turned out to be a lot of ISIS.
All right. Well, there's Nigel Farage doing his thing, kicking butt and taking names, as he always does. He is one of the most, or maybe the most, interesting, entertaining, informative, and competent politicians, probably, I would say, in the world. And anyone who has not followed his amazing progress in the last couple of years is really missing out on something. Did you notice how he predicted that Trump would win? And of course, as we know, now Trump did win. He's the president. Whether or not people are willing to admit it, but I do think that, speaking of Trump again, gradually people are coming around to seeing that he is having an amazing effect. One example in which the Trump effect is actually making a difference is in the French election, as I mentioned before with Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen, I noticed, in this 2.5-hour debate with Macron, the young man who supposedly just came out of nowhere, is even attempting to incorporate some of Le Pen's platform into his ideology or into his promises, into this belief system that he's trying to promulgate. This guy, we can see him as essentially a puppet for the former president of France, Hollande, who's a socialist. Hollande didn't even run. He's a socialist and a globalist. A lot of times people who are socialists or communists are also globalists, because globalism incorporates a lot of the ideas of socialism, and particularly communism. Because what happens is, in effect, is that the people lose their power, and the state gains all the power. And they lose their ability to elect, although they may have sham elections. Like in the European Union, where you have the European Council, which really runs the show. And it is a show because you have the European Parliament. And both Marine Le Pen and Nigel Farage are in the European Parliament. So they see firsthand the shenanigans that go on in the European Parliament. And as Nigel Farage and others have let us know about how the European Parliament works, it is essentially a rubber stamp for the European Council and the unelected leaders of the European Union. They don't have very much power. They really cannot veto, they cannot approve, they can only rubber stamp. So they are for show. European Parliament has it's a show, but it's a show of a false idea of a parliament. You noticed so many empty seats in the European Parliament. Of course, we get that in our own government as well, with a lot of people just out, or maybe too early in the morning or too late in the evening. But nevertheless, Nigel Farage gets up and he speaks powerfully, and he's a confrontational, oppositional figure in the European Parliament, as well as leader of UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party. He's since stepped down, and he now has a radio show every day. And I think that's a good platform for him, because he talks to the people one-on-one, and he gets to voice his opinions, he gets to stay in the public eye, but without having the responsibility. He's already a member of European Parliament, as I said. He was leader of UKIP. Now he just does the two things instead of the three things. He's a very busy guy, no doubt about it. And in a way, he's already accomplished what he came into politics for in the first place, and that was to get the United Kingdom out of the European Union. And what Le Pen has done is to incorporate some of the tactics used by Trump into her debate, in her style of debate. Now, maybe she was already like this, but I thought I saw some of that confidence in her that seemed to be inspired by Trump. Trump's confidence, his almost mocking tone that he used so successfully with 15 or 16 other Republican candidates when they were fighting to gain the honor of being allowed to represent the Republican Party during the election. So we saw that, and we saw how effective that is. Now, the state-run media in France and around the world has uniformly given the win to Macron. But watching it, I didn't see how he won. It just didn't seem that way to me. And it seemed like whenever they would cut to the audience response, people were watching the debate in France and elsewhere. It seemed like they were for Le Pen. So I think that she has overwhelming support in France. Because we have seen in France, if you do some research, you have a hollowing out of the country, the countryside particularly. You have beautiful French towns whose traditional marketplace where people would gather, and with the various little shops that you used to see in a French town, you would see those shops empty, just empty. The downtown empty, no one, few old people walking around. And this happens in rural town after rural town after rural town. And the poverty in France, in some places, is extreme. Very few jobs, very little economic activity going on. And this is just shocking and horrifying to a lot of people, and it should be. And is this beginning to sound familiar? It's like America. The same thing that happened in the United States. The hollowing out of the center of the country. And all you have left is the major cities. The major cities, that's where the economic activity is going on. The local economies are in shambles. And we don't even see much going on in Spain or Italy or Greece. And we know, though, if you look into it, that the economies in those places are also in a shambles, except in the major capital city, maybe two other cities. And that's where the globalists are. That's where the multinational corporations are headquartered. That's where the power elite have their palaces, have their beautiful condos, their luxurious apartments, on the cliff overlooking the Mediterranean or something, And they're doing great. They're doing better than ever. And they say, well, but we need to do this. We need to have this superstate because it's good for everyone. Well, it's not good for everyone. If you listen to what they have to say, the people who run the European Union have always said that some people would suffer. But overall, it would be better for everyone. Well, it turns out that not just some of the people are suffering, but most of the people are suffering. And only a few, the very rich, get the benefits of the European Union. The other people, like the people in Germany, who are paying for the poverty of the people in Spain, Italy, Greece, and now Turkey. If Turkey gets into the European Union, then you have a country that's even poorer than Greece. I mean, if that is possible on the European continent, but apparently it is. Turkey, which has been taken over by a very brutal authoritarian dictator. And the left has the temerity to criticize Trump when he meets with people like Erdogan because of his human rights. When, if Obama or a Democrat were in the presidency, he would no doubt, or she, would do the exact same thing. And yet they would have no problem with that. But that's just the way it is, because your guy is your guy, and he can or she can do no wrong. And a lot of people are like that. People on both sides are like that. That's just the way they are, because they're devoted to that person. They're not devoted to who they stand for or what they stand for or their policies, but it's more of just the personality that they like, and or what they think they represent, the symbol that they represent, like Obama being the first black president, or Hillary Clinton being the first, potentially the first woman president. And I do think that we will get a woman president, but I think there are a lot better choices out there. I personally like Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii, who's the first Hindu in Congress, and extremely competent, outspoken, pisses off both parties, both Republicans and Democrats, even though she is a Democrat. Very independent-minded, understands the devastation of war, having actually served in the military, and I think she would be a good representative as President of the United States, and I'm hoping that she'll run. People have been talking about her running at some point, but she's still quite young. I believe she's still in her 30s. So she's a bit young, maybe down the road. We'll see what happens. But I thought it was interesting. If you can handle the way that the translation worked in the Macron-Le Pen debate in France, I would urge you to watch at least part of it, because it's very interesting. It was brutal. They were talking at each other for 2.5 hours, almost entirely at breakneck speed, talking over each other, and the moderators were completely just helpless. They were unable to control the debate. Macron called Le Pen a liar. Le Pen called Macron a smug banker. And one of the things she said was that either way you cut it, France will be run by a woman, either myself or Angela Merkel. Now, Angela Merkel being the Chancellor of Germany. In other words, what she's saying is that Macron is a tool of the European Union. See, because Angela Merkel, being the Chancellor of Germany, is one of the most powerful people in the European Union. And she is so powerful because Germany has always been the strongest economy on the European continent. And so they tend to dominate, and they're dominating even more. But right now, but the influx of immigrants Angela Merkel's policy that allows unlimited numbers of immigrants to swarm into Germany has been very destabilizing for the country. Because you have a lot of people who are moving in and they don't have a lot to do. They don't have any skills. They don't know German. Some of them can't even write in their own language, much less write in German. A lot of them are under false pretenses. The German people were being told that a lot of these people were children. Well, these children are in their 20s, 30s, even 40s. And as Donald Trump mentions in that clip that you saw, many of them are very strong young men, prime age for the military. And he makes an interesting point. Why are they not in the military fighting for their country, these Syrians? And many of them, and he was absolutely right when he said that 80% of them are not even Syrians. You have Africans coming over, and they're being called Syrians. Well, Syria, I'm sorry, is not in Africa. Not even close to being in Africa. But this is the way the state-run media plays it, that these are Syrians running from this devastating civil war. Well, even if they were Syrians running from a devastating civil war, it would still be wrong, because that civil war should not be happening in the first place. If the United States had not activated and inspired thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of young men to take an extremist and violent stance against the United States, against capitalism, against Christianity, against Europe. If the CIA had not inspired and even handed out free textbooks, provided textbooks in the madrasas around the world, as far away as Afghanistan. I had an Afghan man tell me this. In a madras, he said in the madrasas, the CIA provides the textbooks. The textbooks say violent jihad is the way to go. It's the way to get to heaven. The overthrow of the West is the answer. The CIA wanted and it needs a huge existential global threat that cannot be conquered, cannot be destroyed, cannot be eliminated. And you might wonder, well, why? Why would the CIA not need that? Well, first we have to understand what the CIA actually is. What is the CIA? Oh, the Central Intelligence Agency? No, it's not about intelligence gathering at all. It's about doing the bidding of its globalist multinational masters, the power elite, the secret group of just a very, very small number of men at the very top of the social stratum, so high that we can't even see them, most of them. They stay hidden. They're above the clouds, above the veil of illusion that's been created to hide, for them to hide behind. They're the puppet masters. The CIA, known to its chief rival, the FBI, as an elitist group, as a group of blue bloods. Yes, the CIA is disparaged by the FBI as blue-blooded. And what does blue-blooded mean, for those who don't know? Blue bloods means aristocratic. These are aristocrats. Where do aristocrats hang out? With the elite at the very top. That's who they are, whether they have titles or not. They're still aristocrats. And aristocrats will do anything to maintain and increase their power. And not just for them, but for their children, for their grandchildren, for their great-grandchildren, because they're organized in families. They have a legacy. to build. They all have a purpose. Fight for your family, fight for your class, fight for your buddies. They are not patriots. They don't care about the nation state. And in fact, the idea and the notion of the nation state has been a problem for them for not just 100 years, but centuries, forever. What do aristocrats attempt to do throughout history? Build empires with them at the top. So they're not doing anything different than they have always done. So we have to realize when people tell you, will say, well, they haven't, this is no different than what they've always done. That's right. You're exactly right. No different than what aristocrats have always done. And what has been happening at the same time? People have been fighting against it. Why do you think America was created in the first place? As an antidote to the empire, the aristocrats, to start someplace, a nation state that would do away with all that. So that's all for today. We'll see what happens with the French election. Have a great weekend.